Lobo of Zarya! Hal Simmons! Your sins are innumerable! I am here to wreak vengeance upon your soul! No!
Ever since that battle called back from the pits of cancellation, the show has proven time and time again how entertainingly controversial, fabulously stylish, creatively epic and adorably funny it could be. And Kratos vs. Asura was there too. But this is something else. And yes, remember the last review I made a start like that. And I do mean in terms of breakdowns, editing, animation, music, dialogue, ore farming, and most importantly, a very positive precedent set for that battle that can potentially make the future of the show and its confirmed upcoming episodes even more exciting to think about. So like and subscribe and strap in for a ride into hell, my friends, because the sheer peakness of Ghost Rider vs. Spawn is downright heavenly. The best way for me to describe Ghost Rider's breakdown in this episode is the following. Grab his breakdown from his previous episode with Lobo, strap an Ultimatrix on that bad boy and witness it reach its definitive form. It's the best possible evolution of a character breakdown Johnny Boy could ever receive. Hell, it literally picks up right when the last one ended, on the old King of Hell arc thingy. Great stuff. I love how both the visuals and background music at the start give off the vibe of a cool yet tragic documentary about a living legend of sorts. Speaking of legends, saying that Flaming Skeleton is only the 5th scariest Nicolas Cage performance works as a great compacted version of the Nicolas Cage's scary Joker compared to the relatively dragged on last time. I'm not calling this episode the best comic book team that well for no reason, by the way. It's stuff like the fun trivia and behind the scenes, the numbered issues to support their points, and the loving way they address Spawn's 1990ness. It's just that whatever they did with this one, I just get major I really love comics and I would love for you to get into them too energy. Maybe I'm just being sappy. The editing of course is amazing. I don't wanna take it for granted just because it's kinda became the norm, but I will always mention it even briefly. I just totally love the way they bring back Johnny Blaze being a man possessed in multiple definitions of the term at the beginning and the end in true bookends fashion. And shortly after a Crash Bandicoot reference that flew over my head faster than Thor's hammer, we get introduced to Zertos relatively early on, and not gonna lie, I do like how he's treated more as a full character instead of, let's say, a conclusive footnote for out-of-versal power scaling or whatever. We get his backstory, accomplishments, metal battle with Johnny, brief looks at the many hosts he's had over the years, which brings us to Danny Ketch, who manages to play a surprisingly meaningful role in this entire episode despite not being the Ghost Rider that's centered around. Thanks to him, we're introduced to the other riders, the inner workings of the penance there, how not even Ghost Wars himself is immune to his depowering effect, this useful foreshadowing that will help us later, or him helping out his brother to get out of his King of Hell phase, in a very sometimes family can really drag you out of very dark places kind of way. Again, oddly sweet for a flaming skeleton out of hell. Also, what's also really sweet is how the breakdown ends, with a very cool guitar riff and glorious rock in the background as the coolest Ghost Rider 2 shot they could ever pick, hence the analysis. Okay, it's different kind of sweet, you know, like the difference between "ah, that's sweet" and "sweet bro, sweet." Speaking of differences, I also really dig the contrast between Johnny being described as a Black Ops for heaven, whereas Old Simmons was a Black Ops that ended up in hell. Quite ironic too, given what happens in the battle later on. And on the topic of everyone's fairy tale Spawn, I also really dig the contrast of Spawn's powers being essentially a Swiss Army knife of tools, whereas Zertos is more like a big flaming chainsaw of power. They go over such tools in relatively orderly fashion, from standard superhero stuff, bodily stuff, mind stuff, god stuff, cloaky stuff, hand-to-hand stuff, pause, and most importantly penance theory stuff. Now, the last time I remember the breakdowns actively acknowledging a similarity between the combatants was all the way back in season 8, with Super Broly being rightfully described as Dragon Ball Hulk. But in this case is another similarity with purpose, which also serves as foreshadowing for later. Yeah, in general the writing between the breakdowns and the fight itself is very well constructed, in a way that my foreshadowing loving brain really like it. Like this edit of Godspawn ascending with energy in his hands later happening in this fight too, specific writing like Spawn being said to be the guy that can, quote, hand souls with just a glare, stare, eyes, hello, establishing Zeratos being outplayed by a caped up soul controlling trickster, Johnny fighting Zeratos for control, meaning he never starts out at full power in his base form, giving Spawn plenty of time to learn and catch up with such power, or even Spawn's uncharacteristically stupid way in which he self-deleted himself out of and then right back into existence, being actually a colossal trump card in disguise. All of these things end up playing in either the animation or the outcome. This is what breakdowns can be at their best, essentially working as the first two acts of a movie, that way the third act hits, man, you know, like Shrek 2. Hence why it really helps whenever the fight itself is not the only spectacular part of an episode. Boomstick's complete lack of empathy about Spawn's situation is just so abrupt it's hilarious. Yeah, in general, all the foreshadowing cosmic stuff is balanced out / disguised by charmingly funny edits, jokes, such as listing Spawn's rogues gallery, starting with an hilariously unimpressive ice cream killer, then all of a sudden Superman 1 million, the organ music later turning into Heavenly Choir, which is literally just Spawn's character in music form, and I really like how no matter how godly or multiversal Spawn's described story gets, it starts and ends in the alleyways of New York. I got into Spawn comics for my prediction video back then, and his relationship with the homeless is a big part of his character, which makes his comment to Johnny later kinda funny since he did see his fair share of bomb fights. Speaking of...
Nights like these drive men insane. Brimstone in the air. Something's coming. If it wants a piece of me, there'll be hell to pay.
As Spawn spawningly broods over the city, with a close-up that later bookends this animation, he talks about feeling brimstone in the air, and how there'll be hell to pay. And I already love the dialogue so much, especially the last line, which you could interpret as either Spawn acknowledging he's got a whole hell of a lot badness to make up for, which is not gonna be the first time in this fight he acknowledges that, or him saying that whoever's coming in is coming in for a whooping. Only thing I wish was kept in an otherwise perfectly translated storyboard was Ghost Rider gliding his wheels over Spawn's face. That just felt like a fun smudge of disrespect before the actual setup is revealed.
Go back to the pit you squirmed from, Hellspawn.
Make me.
I love how perfectly fitting this is for both. Being a literal Hellspawn, Spawn would be on Ghost Rider's radar, with the latter apparently being on his full-on must catch every demon arc from his King of Hell arc in the comics. I will say though, it did kinda feel like another type of ghost with this whole "hey, we don't want your kind around these parts." Sorry. Not to mention just this shot in general. The flames slowly catching up to their owner, Spawn's cape flapping in glorious fashion, Strider starting the fight by ascending in order to bring Spawn downwards. The delicious irony of this entire first sash taking place on a church, a symbol that Johnny smashes despite supposedly representing the forces of the holy here. Barely any hit scene and it's already absolute cinema, man. Also, apparently it takes place in the same city that Batman and Spider-Man fought once. You'd think they fixed that window by now. Not gonna lie, I did need to see the storyboards to fully understand what was up with Johnny here. Apparently it turned into a full-blown comet to literally plow through Spawn. Not that the latter is particularly bothered.
If you care, it's nothing personal.
Sloppy, you fight like a bum.
Wayherd voices Spawn in a way that's 100% very Kid David-y, but somehow even deeper. I'm not even complaining, I just didn't think it was possible for Kid David sounding Spawn to sound even more badass. Stephen Kenley of course reprises his role as Ghost Rider from Lobo vs Ghost Rider. and I really do like how slightly raspier sounds compared to his clash with Lobo. I just really appreciate the bits of personality Johnny gets besides, being God's favorite party pooper, like the way he folds his arms here as he unironically pulls a "Hey, nothing personal, kid," with the line as a whole giving me major sorry a lot of mercy vibes from the live action movie. Or just how he madly cackles as he Ghost Rider fights the truck. I just get the feeling that he started off professional because procedure, but he's low-key starting to really have fun. Once Zeratos comes in, however, it's just pure business. But regardless of who's taking the driver's seat, I love how Spawn's no-nonsense short sentences clash against their biblically long monologues.
Go back to the pit you squirmed from, Hellspawn.
Make me.
The vestments of the holy cannot disguise your wickedness.
God forbid.
Al Simmons, your sins are innumerable. I am here to wreak vengeance upon your soul.
I eat sin for breakfast.
As this comment points out, they fully capitalize on a fun clash between Ghost Rider rocking that biker gang vibe yet shouting poetry with every line, whereas the ethereal looking dramatic cape flapping fella is just done with everyone's bullshit and he will intimidate YouTube guidelines to make you aware of that.
You've earned your damnation.
If you've been following my Death Bell reviews, you know there are a few things in this series I love as much as what I call summary scenes. Basically just short snippets of this fight that kinda end up summing up how this fight will play out, the chemistry between the two combatants, well, both things at once. Sure, Ghost Rider almost immediately depletes Spawn's limited necroplasm with his soul-centered attack and infinitely stronger might, but Spawn's blatantly superior fighting skills and nifty tricks, in this case the Damnation Stairs sending Spawn into the one place where he too gets an infinite power boost, as evidenced by the Darkseid-esque way he boom dooms Ghosty into hell with him, all deny Johnny the chances to permanently seal the deal. Spawn is not far off at all when he comments Johnny's lack of training and clear habit of just letting his pure power be enough, which wasn't quite the case here. Between him descending from the cross with accompanying dramatic lightning, pulling out the Agony Axe from Sword Calibur, or hell, the Necroplasm counter period, Spawn kinda ends up referencing all of his notable video game appearances in one fell swoop. Good stuff. And on the topic of that counter, I love how many different meanings the death bell in the background takes during the fight. It starts off simply to signal the Necroplasm counter, then it's depletion, then it's chill-inducing infinite boost, and then it rings a bell for Zeratos' own funeral. That's peak cinema.
Make me. Nothing personal, asshole.
It's sound design touches like this, or even something as small as Fire and Cinder fighting over Spawn due to Ghosty being in front of the rain, that sets the stage on whether a death battle would be peak fiction to me or not. Also, this whole building side fight is 100% pure aura farming on both parties, don't get it twisted. Is it perfectly feasible given Spawn's telekinesis and Ghost Rider's physics-defying stunts? Absolutely. Is it in character? You bet your sweet baby it is. Now, I don't wanna make names, but you see, this right here is how you make a reference. Kratos vs Azura. Number one, it perfectly works contextually in the given situation, since Spawn is essentially saying, you want to bring me to hell? Well, let's go together then, shall we? But two, it's also a Tales from the Hood reference starring Spawn's most famous voice actor. It works whether you get it or you get the reference or not, and assuming you watched the episode before YouTube censored this bit. I like to call it the Shrek 2 way of doing a reference. Take notes, Shark Tales.
I'll be damned.
Yes, you will.
For the third time in a row already, they're cooking with the dialogue because you can't deny how hard that response was. Props to Zeratos for maintaining a wee bit of humor before he kindly reminds you how much he doesn't know what an indoor voice is. Rather than, Johnny being calm and Zeratos being shouty, I love how they both incorporate bits and pieces from each other, which makes them feel more nuanced than three-dimensional characters. Speaking of, this transformation sequence of the skull slowly floating upwards as the colors change and it gets bigger is such a badass upgrade from last time. Ditto for the brown-shaped cranium. Try to say that 3 times fast. Crown-shaped cranium, crown-shaped cranium, crown-shaped... Lita also gets a brief time under the limelight, however, as it tries to protect Spawn from a very intense type of light. It's really funny how they use the same effect for Spawn's time stop as Dio's, given how many similarities he has with Alucard in literally everything else. Speaking of other franchises, however... This reference is really funny to me for 2 reasons. I had just recently finished Ghost Riders vs Scorpions rap battle by the Infinite Source before this episode dropped. Y'all know it's still going, by the way? I got introduced to whole ass characters thanks to those rap battles. And number 2, that line being used to reference the hellish, chain-swinging Revenant Hanzo Asashi is quite funny given how the current timeline Hanzo Asashi is a child whose wife in any other universe is currently married to his rival turned brother in arms. And look, sometimes franchises outlive their pop culture ideas in very interesting ways. I can't tell what I love more between the music getting more intense as Spawn's situation does, or the reveal of his massive wings accompanied by the holy light, whoosh sound design and immaculate music. They both pale in comparison to the exchange that immediately follows, however, which might be one of my top 3 bits of writing in Dead Battle history.
The vestments of the holy cannot disguise your wickedness.
God forbid.
Not only Ghost Rider recognizes that even supposedly holy beings aren't exempt from punishment and vengeance. Spawn straight up agrees with him on that. He's basically saying, your pretty angel wings can't hide the weight of your sins, followed by, yeah, I'm not hiding anything. God forbid they ever do. Basically wearing his mistakes on his sleeve and not seeing himself as any better just because he's an ascendant demon. So much character work is conveyed in just a few seconds, I love it. To top it all off, what are the specific lyrics of Hell's Angels that play in the background during this very specific bit? I'm not ashamed. Man, take Goku to this episode, man. Everything from this point onwards is literally one of my favorite moments in the show's history. Yes, on par with the old scene after the showtime from Bowser vs Eggman. That is how much I replayed this part. And clearly not just me. I love the contrast between Zeratos being huge, whereas Spawn is smaller but his wings are colossal. If that's not an immaculate way to visualize Zeratos' immense power against Spawn's huge bag of tricks that allow him to keep up, symbolized by his wings, I don't know what it is. In that battle, we've had a mountain of comic book characters said to be able to tear reality, destroy universes, affect dimensions and whatnot. But this segment right here is the first time where I felt like it was that way. Like Spawn's transformation alone brings an entire heaven-like dimension straight into hell. As you see, the realities bleed against each other and the 2 dimensions keep clashing in accordance to whoever's representing them, getting more space depending on who's winning. And this part is just satisfying as hell. Just choo 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 whoop boom as it goes up, like it's awesome. This is the first comic book episode we've had in a long time, and by god did the team say, okay, let's enhance literally everything we've ever done with comic book characters so far. Like, this whole segment fully solidified sprites as my favorite animation style in all of that battle. Like, 3D and hand-drawn can still be peak, but sprites are just more iconic. Not to mention versatile and frankly less likely to fail compared to 3D, on top of being vastly more likely to give you peak for longer compared to hand-drawn. Not that there aren't any exceptions to that. Also, I wanna apologize because I asked if this part was animated by Moro or Ruiz, which are the two Dead Battle animators that come to mind with end-run stuff, but my mind completely omitted Zach Watkins, who's done this entire fight on his own with work from his partner, and has been on the show since season 2. So hey, mad respect on Zach Watkins because you cooked, man. You absolutely cooked with this one. It takes a specific kind of sound design and visuals for me to somehow feel the weight of losing limbs I don't have. Besides, depriving his opponent of the means of flying around, you could also interpret this action as Zeratos literally stripping Spawn of his quote vestments of the holy, that he deems him so unworthy of. Let the people around you look at your real face type shit.
Al Simmons, your sins are innumerable. I am here to wreak vengeance upon your soul. Lobo of Zarya, your sins are innumerable. I am here to wreak vengeance upon your soul.
I immediately recognized the Lobo Rider callback obviously, and yes, I loved every second of it, down to the same animations and sentence structure. But it is kinda funny how even Zeratos recognizes that no one called Albert deserves to be called by the full name. He's a semi-quasi-angelic devil, not a monster. The sprite work in Death Battle has evolved to the point where I initially had problems on how to even call this scene right here. The shading, the details, the somehow amazing lip sync for someone who doesn't have lips. No clue if this is more difficult to animate compared to end-run stuff, but man, amazing regardless. Speaking of details, I love the mixture of sound design and line delivery to emphasize how pissed Zeratos is right now. A la don't you fucking dare look at me now, boy, which Spawn indeed tries to do at first, until...
I eat sin for breakfast. Have a taste of your own goddamn medicine.
I love the visuals of the chains keeping on swinging rapidly inside Zeratos' skull, as it captures everything inside his eyes, Major League First of It vibes. If you wanna keep hearing these bars, I hope you subscribe. As Necroplasm flames engulf his soul, and Spawn's already healed wings, plus oddly short arms, look, he can shapeshift his body, probably wanted an easier hold, as he delivers this banger of a line. We then switch to Zeratos' point of view from a previously holy light illuminated Spawn to a more grainy perspective as things get blurry, the flames close in like a mouth closing its jaws, and we get a famous penance square. This is a moment from Ghost Rider 2006 issue 18, in which Ghost Rider tests out the honesty of the angel Himmel with a penance stare, unexpectedly pulverizing him. A very shameful memory to be the very first thing John sees during the penance squared, but extremely fitting way to start this Uno reverse judgment. The amazing comic editing for the breakdowns is brought directly into the battle as Zeratos goes through a playlist of every single penance stare he's ever delivered. Some may call it a lazy slideshow, but I personally see it as Spawn transcending mediums and going through his opponent's entire comic book history. The only thing that would make this even more epic is if we had a glimpse of Lobo amongst his victims, confirming that this is indeed the same Ghost Rider from that episode. But that detail is honestly overshadowed by the sheer absolute cinema of Spawn penance staring the penance stare guy to death, as the pearly gates overwhelm the Brimstone Inferno. Call it heaven over hell. But instead of Ghost Rider just exploding, what we do get is Spawn literally pulling the ghost out of him. The Death Battle team couldn't help themselves, however, as they sprinkled even more amazing character work even here. This time with Spawn disappointingly nodding his head as he peacefully lets Johnny's soul fall into hell like a blazing comet. I like to think this is partially Spawn feeling some empathy for a fellow deal with the devil victim who didn't quite fully read the fine print. In fact, I honestly think he's more angry with Zeratos than anything, hence why he does something as hilariously petty as making him powerlessly watch his host pass away. Almost in a, yeah look at that bitch, leading him to be alone with Spawn with the latter literally holding his life in his hands. And so the foul-mouthed anti-hero crushes his foe remains in his hands, because Big Fiction recognizes Big Fiction, I guess.
It's like you said, nothing personal, asshole.
And we end with this immaculate holy shot of the golden rays peering to Spawn as he either crushes and or absorbs Zeratos, the final death bell ringing for the latter. Big cinema, 10 out of 10 ending, absolutely loved it. And it's not even the only conclusion of this episode I wanna particularly praise. If you remember my prediction video, I was ready to come to terms with the fact that Ghost Rider's superior cosmology was gonna give him the win, as it's always been the case with pretty much every time Marvel or DC are involved against other companies, and despite me rooting for Spawn, but that did not happen here. In fact, power was the only advantage Ghosty Wosty had, hilariously enough. Needless to say, I need to go into detail for why I love this verdict. I always hated whenever matchups get decided based solely on whoever makes the bigger booms with each punch. There's a certain versus YouTuber I am quite fond of, but they almost always focus on scaling and attack potency alone to decide the winner of a matchup, and that's what I like to call the most boring side of power scaling possible, which we coincidentally got a near perfect representation of in the previous episode, which mostly ignored the technicalities of Asura's growing strength, reinvigorating wrath in favor of Kratos' punches being a million versal or some shit. What we get in this episode instead is the very true fact that yes, power and strength are not everything, and that battle can recognize that. This is exciting for me personally, because it means that superior cosmology, which more often than not is a guaranteed win despite hinging on flimsy reasoning and or compositing different people's works in one weird abstraction, is no longer the trump card for a comic book character to rely on. It means I can actually be somewhat excited for matchups like Kyle vs Simon, which will now involve actually looking into how their many powers and acts counteract or nullify each other. Like Kabuto says on Twitter, actually it's a good thing Spawn won despite Ghost Rider having the power advantage with Marvel scaling, cause now I can actually debate for characters winning against Marvel DC heroes. Exactly. It's a more in-depth and fun look than superior dimension scaling, which was most of Kyle's arguments for victory anyway. I don't even hate the guy, and I am sorry that he gets zero adaptations besides a Superman TAS episode. But I just love Simon too much for me to generally look forward to him being fed to a comic book herald, you know? Hell, Spawn didn't even beat him on his own terms of power alone, but by counteracting a specific ability and out-enduring literally everything else. No matter how much damage Blades and Zeratos can dish out. It doesn't matter if Harold Simmons was able to tank it all, plus use his superior skills and intellect to figure out a way to use his resistances wisely. This to me is the best possible way to do power scaling. You don't just look into the scaling per se, but you actually look into the details, each power and ability, how they bounce off each other. Experience, battle experience, resistances, you know, the full picture, not just oh he punches 3 galaxies instead of 1 so he wins, you know? Hell's Angels is immaculate. Pure heavy metal goodness that yes, I do think it poses genuine competition to Game Over. The title obviously references both combatants having both a little bit of demonic and angelic into them, how they're literally heroes out of hell, you know, in the sense of superiors being guardian angels of sorts. But more blatantly, there's a biker gang literally called Hell's Angels apparently, fitting Ghost Rider's side of things like a glove. The second half, however, and the part that makes my soul ascend like a head-banging angel, is the addition of the heavenly choir in the background as God Spawn takes center stage. As if his angeliness is fighting back against the biker heavy metaliness of Ghost Rider. Successfully so. The first batch of lyrics is 100% Spawn-centric, you know, screaming from hell, surrounded by flames, the reminder of his necroplasm running out the more he fights. But the second paragraph, as the heavy metal music fully kicks in, is 100% Ghosty Wosty using his penance there. The chorus is when it gets interesting, however. First of all, the amazing rhyme scheme. Killing and saving, two sides of the same thing, it's always the same thing that brings me back. It's a great rhythm and rhyme scheme. Killing and saving being two sides of the same thing really brings to mind the idea of a mercy kill, which would work as one way to interpret the way Spawn lets go of Johnny here. The rest goes over how neither is stranger to burning or being enslaved, hell, is the name of the game to them. And fun wordplay, but I'm 100% sure that Ghost Spawn from the Black is more related to Spawn than the Rider. The next part takes a surprisingly sympathetic turn as they go over the similarities, both of them being dreaded monsters, plus a subtle nod to Spawn's reality warping, that live torturous lives, only for Spawn's acceptance about his existence as a sinner fully kick in right when the angelic war does, and the rest repeats itself. Man, every aspect of this episode is really another excuse for me to pull the writing fire gif, isn't it? On the narrative theme side of things, despite the realms they end up representing in the climax, I can't confidently call this a clean-cut Hell vs Heaven like I did for the likes of Joe Joker or Dio Card. I think that for this one, I'll say that the narrative theme is power versus potential. Zeratos, being an universal Marvel Herald, was always gonna give him the edge in power and attack potency, especially for someone whose base form very much runs on a limited supply. However, with so many reality warping powers and existing affecting resistances, on top of his superior training and skills, and the means to also reach infinite power if Ghost Rider uses the latest version of his go-to move, Spawn had all the cards in the table to catch up and harness that potential. Because what Ghost Rider did was bringing a hammer against a complete toolkit that he mistook for a nail. For this review's bonus chapter, I just wanna gush over how much this episode brilliantly works as a sequel to Ghost Rider vs Lobo. Not gonna lie, there wasn't really much of a core theme or connections for that one, besides biker bounty hunters from Marvel or DC, and I am pretty sure that that Battle team just wanted to bring Lobo into the show and just settle for Blaze as his opponent. That said though, I always disliked Lobo, never been a fan of overly vulgar characters that thrive on being edgy, despite supposedly being a parody of 90s edginess. Well, Spawn happens to be the embodiment of 90s edginess, but I love how neither of them fully takes Ghost Rider seriously and just proceed to snark at his self-righteousness, with very different outcomes. Like Lost Steel said, in this death battle, Ghost Rider came off short in attack potency, at least in base form, but had specific powers and acts to make up in a way that even Lobo's power couldn't keep down. Then in season 2025, Ghost Rider finds himself at the exact opposite end of that, in which a notable power advantage was literally all he had against Spawn, whose various powers and acts were just too much for even Zeratos' power to keep down. So when Al talked about giving him a taste of his own medicine, he literally meant it in every single conceivable way possible. It almost makes me not want the third Ghost Rider episode due to how perfectly these two complement each other as a duology of sorts. Maybe next time it could be a tie against someone of equal power and X. I don't know, man, I seem to remember Joker was pretty damn busted. And yeah, man, I think I literally said everything I needed to. It's a comic book themed episode that I generally think holds competition to Frankie Bowser vs Eggman in most categories, and the cleanest 10 out of 10 I remember giving to a death battle in recent memory. It's honestly, yeah, peak as hell. Be on the lookout for my Mahito vs Shigaraki prediction video or reaction depending on when I upload this. You should probably see what I end up uploading on the pop-up on the notifications right about here. A day later, of course, because I'm not gonna post two videos at once. Drink lots of water and do the same. Oko Krypton, hoping I made your day slightly better.